Well, hello, and welcome back, or welcome if you're new here. This is the Ultimate API Challenge, a place where we work, grow, and learn together with different APIs, as well as a variety of tech stack, in order to, by the end, have a project or an end result that you can put on your web development portfolio. If you're new here, I have several challenges that we did before, so if at some point you feel that this is way too advanced for you, check those out, or keep on challenging yourself and code along with me. You got this. Today we're gonna build a very simple memory game, very basic one. When the user has cards, they click on them and then the cards flip, and if it's a match with the images, then they gotta win. There is also a dedicated website and a dedicated page for this specific challenge, as for all the challenges, and I'll leave all the links that you need in the description box below. And without further ado, have fun and let's go. Okay, so before we start, let me show you how our end result looks like. We're gonna have our main page where we have some settings that we can select from: abstract, people, animals, nature. You can change those categories to something else that you prefer, but we're gonna go with those ones. Then we're also gonna give the user an option to select the amount of cards that they want to play with, minimum 2, and maximum I think is 100 something. And then we also added like an extra kick to the game with a pace, which is easy, medium, hard, or pro. Once you select, let's say, 8 cards, nature, and we click on start, we have our loading indicator, and then we get our cards. And then the user clicks on one, nothing happens. We click on the second one, it was not a match, so they flip back, and here we got 2 ones that match, then they flip back together, and you see that you cannot select them anymore, and they have slightly different color, although it might not be that noticeable, so you can change that if you want, but you get the point. Let me find all the correct cards. There we go. And once you found all of them, you get a prompt of awesome, finish game, and you're being redirected. Not really redirected, you're just being shown our settings component again. That's what we're gonna be building. To get the starter files, you need to go to GitHub. In the description box below, there is a link to it. You get the starter files, clone that repository to your local machine, and let's see where to go from there. So what do we have here? We have a README, a package.json, where we can see that we're doing the memory game API. We're gonna be using React, some propTypes. As you can see, nothing else that is special here. It's quite boilerplatey. Let's start with our public directory. We have our favicon or favicon that I chose, cards. Then we have our index HTML. We have some fonts here that I added from Google Fonts, and I changed the title to memory game. Nothing else was changed. Very, very standard. We can jump to index.js, and that's where the magic sort of happens. I tell that in every React tutorial that I do. This is how React is rendering to the HTML that we saw here. That's how they are being connected. If you see, we have a document.getElementById root. This is exactly how React attaches everything that we build to that element, which is this one. We were in index.js. Index.js is quite basic. Then we have some index CSS with some very, very basic things. And then we have our app, and that's where we're gonna start building things. So how does this thing work? All the CSS is given, all of the components are given, what I have already prepared in terms of structure, but those components don't have anything in them, and that's what we're going to be filling. We also have 2 hooks that we're going to be using, custom hooks, and a utils file. CSS in all of them is given, so maybe that's kind of like a little hint what's going to be happening in each component. But apart from that, we're going to be building every JavaScript part from kind of scratch. Let's go back to our app.js. We're going to start doing something here. First, let's manage to fetch some data from our API, and then we're gonna make it into cards. And after we have the cards, then maybe we can add the settings in order to make it more flexible and dependent on the user's input. For that, we would need to check our API and the documentation that it gives us. For that, let's go to the Pexels API. You can find it under pexels.com/API, and you can get started here. You will sign up for an account. Let me tell you why. Because when we go to the documentation, we scroll down a little bit, we see here authorization. For this API, authorization is required. Anyone with a Pexels account can request an API key, which you will receive instantly. You're gonna see something like that. Here is your API key. You cannot change it. That's why I blurred mine. Once you have it, copy it. In our code, you will see a file called .env.local. This is where you need to insert your API key. Save it and forget about it. If you don't see this file, then create it as a .env.local or just .env. I'll show you later on how we're gonna use it, but the most important part is that this should be React_app and then underscore something something, so we can use it and you will not have a problem to follow the tutorial. Let's go back to the app. Why won't we do an install of our package so then we can run the app and see what we have? For that, we will need to go to our terminal. I'm in my starter files. I do yarn install, which can take a little bit of time, and we're done. Cool. Now if we do yarn start, we should get redirected to our game and see how it actually looks like. It's loading. There we go. We have nothing. Let me open the console. I hope you can see it. This is how our very base of our memory game looks like. This is a background thing. Let me show you where it is so you can see where I got it from. It's in the background component. As you can see, we're included in our app. That's how we see it. We just create an array that we call cubes. It has 10 items in it. Then we just loop over it and the rest is a CSS magic. The design is taken from this code pen, so go ahead and give a like to the author who actually created it. I just took it. That's just so you know where those cubes come from. But as I said, we included them in the app just like for the fun of it, just the glass morphism of it. It's there. We're not going to touch it anymore. We said that at first we want to fetch our data. Let's go back to our documentation and check how can we make our first request. We know that we will need the authorization header. Keep that in mind. Search for photos. Here we go. We see that it's a GET request and this is the base URL. Take it from here. That's our base URL. Let's go to our code and just name it const base URL equals this. Don't forget quotes around it. We're just keeping it here for now. I'm not gonna state it. We're also gonna be using fetch. So let's go to the documentation of fetch and read a little bit about that. Alright, so if we check what is fetch and how to use fetch, there is MDN docs where you can read all about it. I'm gonna leave the link to this page in the helpful resources on the Ultimate API Challenges website for this specific challenge, so you can have all the reading materials there. If we check, fetch is fairly simple. You just write fetch, you provide the base URL that you want to use, and you attach .thens to it. But we know that we need to send an authorization header, so let's check how to do that. Here we have an example with the fetch. We have the URL, our base URL, and then we have method, mode, cache, blah, 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 blah. And here we have the headers. That's what we're going to be doing. Let's go to our code. In our function, let's just write the fetch right here. This is going to change, but for now, let's do that and see how it works. We define our URL, which are our base URL, as I mentioned. Then we open curly brackets. Inside of them, we type headers. And we write authorization, and in here is going to be the process.env.react app. Remember the key that we added in our env local file. There we go. Save it. Since the fetch happens right on when the component is mounted, we should see that in our network tab. Let's go back to our game. Process is not defined. We need to quit our server and restart it. Let's go ahead. You see now the process is defined. When you use the process.env or env, the server reads it out on the first time once you run the server. So if you have some issues with it, that maybe you add some new variables and it's not there, then quit your server, start it again, should be good to go. So let's go to our networks tab. And as you can see, I have it filtered. You can have all. I am filtering it for fetch or XHR requests in order not to have everything, just what I want to see. And there we have our search. And if we check here, we have our request URL. We did it. Yay. However, we are getting status of 404 because we didn't define a query param. And that's going to be our next step. If we go to the documentation of Pexels API, in the photos, search for photos, where we got our get base URL to start with, we see that in the parameters, they define a query that is required. All the other ones looks like they're optional, but the query is required, and that's why we get a 400. So the search query, it can be ocean, tigers, pears, people, group of people walking, basically anything that you type in Pexels. Let's do nature. To just start it out, we do search. We need to add a question mark because now it's going to be params of that URL. We write query and equals to nature. Save it and see what we're getting now. There we go. We have photos now. Woohoo! Now now it's time to construct our URL with a little bit of more params or parameters. So let's go through the parameters that they have. First is the query, which is kind of like the type. In the beginning, I showed you in the settings, I had people, abstract, animals, and nature. We're going to add those as a selection later on. Then we have orientation, which is a non-negotiable for us because it's going to be a square. We're not going to let the user decide that because we know that our cards are square. So that's what we need to do. There are two ways to go about it. We can or continue extending this params here. Everything that comes after the question mark is params of the URL. And we could do orientation equals square, save it, and you could continue bringing on and on and on and on. Or we could do something more fun. We could construct this URL. Let me show you. Let's create a const build URL, a function. And what this function is going to do, it's going to build us our URL. As first, let's define our URL, which is going to be the base one that we had before this. We could also do this, or we could use new URL, put it like that. The benefit of using new URL and one more constructor that I'm going to show you is that it helps you with encoding, decoding, and kind of like making things a little bit more correct. Now we need our search params. In order to add that, we do URL.search. So the constructor gives us this property. If you're feeling lost, that's absolutely fine. You can go to new URL MDN and you can read what do I mean by that. Here you see the URL is a constructor that returns a newly created URL object. Basically, it's an object with functions on it. Just like, you know, bit by bit, get into the flow, we're gonna get it. New URL search params. Those also help us encode everything properly so we don't have any errors or any issues or any spaces that the browser cannot read and misunderstand our request. So what this also does is it adds for us this question mark. It takes the URL, this one, and then we can define here query nature, save it, and then the URL, if we console log it here, it's gonna look like this. Well, of course, just like putting a question mark is not something that is like, oh my god, I need to use all of those new methods. But for future reference is something that makes things a little bit more proper. But of course, you can continue constructing your URL and creating it by yourself, or you can use those constructors and methods. So we have our query nature, and nature is now hard-coded, but it's going to be changed. So let's maybe put to do change to a variable, just so we keep track which ones are going to be changed and which ones are not. Because, for example, orientation is not going to be changed. Size, also non-negotiable for us. We're going to go with small. What else do we have? Color, we don't really care. Unless you really want to make it advanced game, then you could maybe like add a color, so then it's harder for people to figure out which one is a match in the cards. But we're not going to do that. Per page is going to be our amount of cards. Per page is going to be also a variable eventually. Change to a variable, because remember, again, in the settings we had like the plus and the minus where we could change the amount of cards that the user wants to play with. For now, let's maybe make 2, and keep in mind that the amount of cards per page is not equal the amount of images that we're requesting from the API. After we construct all of that, we need to return the URL and call this function instead of our base URL. Build URL, call it here. If you call the function here, what's going to appear here is this URL after this whole thing is done. You can remove this base URL. Maybe I'm too quick to do that, but let's see how that works. Let's go to our memory game, refresh, and there we go. You see we have the per page, we have a page, we have photos, next page. There we go. We have nature, orientation square, size small, and per page is 2. Awesome. One more thing that I would like to change is the parameter page. Why? Because imagine if we play again and again and again the same game, the API is going to keep on giving us the first page available, which is page number 1. We don't want that, because if I played, let's say, with 6 cards, I guess them all, then my expectation that the next game that I play is going to give me different images, even if I keep all the same settings. For that, we need to spice it up and change the page. So we would need a randomizer for our page number. I have a function that I have prepared before. It's a const get random page, and it's going to give you any random page between 1 and 10. You could also give it like 100 or something, but I'm not sure if the API has that many pages, but 10 pages, I went with the safe one. All we need to do is call get random page, save it, and let's see what our request looks like. Now we have a page 4. If we refresh it again, we have a page 6. Awesome. Now what we would need to do is to move this bit as well as this to a thing called custom hook. We already have it prepared, which is called the useGetImages. We're going to extend this logic, which is non-existent almost, put all of this into this hook. And why do we even need to use a custom hook? Is because hooks are in general a great idea to decouple your JavaScript code from the component code. You can also reuse them in different components, which makes it much more simple to build a very tiny components, very isolated, and then maybe like put some hooks where you need here and there. Let's just take all of this, cut it out from here, drop it in here, as well as our little function. We can put it outside of the hook, save it, save the app. If we go back, refresh it, we will not see any API call happening. That's correct. Now there are several things that we want to do. First of all, we need to call this hook in our app simply by importing it. Import from hooks / use get images. In here, we can simply call the use get images, and that's gonna activate our hook in a way. If we go again to our page, we're gonna see that now we have again our query happening. Good. Now we need to do some changes here. So first of all, as a generic thing, you don't want to have just like a loosen fetch that is gonna be called every time that a component is rendered and every time a component is changed. So let's put our fetch into its own function and call it fetch pix. I'm just gonna put it in here. Where do we then call this function? That's gonna be in our useEffect hook. UseEffect hook is not a custom hook, it is a hook that React gives us. If you saw, as soon as I was typing useEffect, Visual Studio Code imported it for me automatically. That's how you import it. Use a named import from React. What it does, it basically, you define when to fire which function, kind of, you know, that's not like the whole functionality of it, but kind of the gist. We want to have something happening when our hook, custom hook, the useGetImages, is being called. And for us, that's gonna be fetch pix. Save it. Let's see what happens. Do we still get our request? Yes, but now only once. That's exactly the magic that sort of happened with the useEffect. Once the hook is rendered, once this is being called, only then, only once, called the fetch pix. Which is great because we don't need to keep on calling that function all the time, again and again. But now, what are we going to do exactly with the images that we're getting? Let's maybe console log them. Let's do a dot then. We're gonna do data. We need to do a data.json because when I was building it, if I'm not mistaken, we had to do a JSON on it, and then we do a data, and let's console log the data. So what we basically did here is that we waited for the fetch. Fetch is a promise. Once it fetched and got a response, it goes to the then, and the data here is the response that we're getting from the API. You can call it however you want. It can be data, it can be blah, it can be response, anything you want. Then you do a .json on it, and you can attach another .then on it. And in this case, this data is already going to be data.json. And then we just console log it. So let's see what we're gonna have. And open our console. We have again a process not defined, though things are working. The beauty of JavaScript. Let's quit our server again and run it. That most likely happened because we moved our code to the hook. Yeah, you see, now it's gone. Cool. So now when we console log it, we see that we have next page, page per page, photos, 2 only because that's what we requested. Now we need to return something to our app. We know that we will have to get some images from here. Let's check. It was data.photos. Let's console log it here then. Photos. There we go. Cool, because we didn't need any other data. We just need to give it data, give it information, the parameters, and then the rest what it gives us, we are only interested in the photos. Those data.photos we need to give back to our component where we're calling our useGetImages. And this can be easily done by returning something from our custom hook. So we could do, for example, const images, or maybe we don't even need to deconstruct, we just can expect only one thing, images, equal it to useGetImages, and you're good to go. And in here we could console log our images. If we save it now, we're not gonna get anything. It's undefined because we're not returning anything. Please ignore this process is not defined. I don't know, maybe it's that the hot reload is playing with us. So let's go back to useGetImages. Here we need to return the data.photos somehow. A way to do it could be having the images stored in a local useState. Set images equals useState. it's going to be an empty array for now as a default. If you're not familiar with useState, I can highly recommend you to read the beta React docs. They're amazing. I learned also a ton of new things from them. It's much better than the current documentation that they have. React has. They're still expanding it and extending it, so more to come. But the gist is that this is what makes our hook and our components reactive. Whenever the images are going to be changed, it's going to trigger a re-render of our components. And that's what we want, because as soon as we get images, we want to display them. You get the images, which is the variable that you're going to be holding the information in, and you have a function to set this variable, because you cannot just like let images equal something. It's not how it works. You need to use the special function set images. The function can be named anything you want, but as a convention, you name something, let's say apples, and then you do set apples. Same as in our case, we have images and we use set images. So let's go. Copy set images, and in this then, as soon as we have data.photos, we can swap it for set images. And now we could return images from our hook. You see what I did? Let me close the build URL. What we have, a const images that as soon as this hook is loaded is going to be an empty array. But once the hook is loaded, we're also going to fire a fetch pics function, which is going to fetch for us our data that contains the photos that we need. Once we have those photos, we have a .then, we put it into JSON, and then we have another .then where we're going to store the data.photos in the images up here through the function set images. And as soon as we have something new, since it's in a useState, our component, wherever we're using the useGetImages, is going to be notified. We can check that out by simply going back to our app. We're already doing a const images here. It can be named whatever you want, can be blah, because you're not deconstructing it, you're just expecting something as a return from this essentially function. So let's see, we have a console log of images. First, as you see, it's an array of 0 because we said that our base begins with an empty array. So that's correct. And then as soon as our fetch finished, it set the images again. And now in our images, we have an array of 2 images. We can now remove our base URL. Let's do a tiny cleanup. We could also put this get random page into our utils. Now, if we're checking what we have in this hook, we have our little to-dos where we wanted to have our query and the per page to be flexible, right? We want them to depend on a variable, to depend on the input that the user is giving us. In order to do that, we need to go to a component called settings and work with that one. So this component is already created for us. Let's visit it. What does it have? Nothing. In the beginning, let's include this component, and we can just copy down this line and replace the background with settings. And then we can just add them under our H1. If we save it, we go to our image, and what do we have? We have settings. Yay! Why do we have that? Because in the settings, we have return a p tag of settings. We can remove that. And let me show you what I have in style for this one. First, we need to create a div. And in the div, we're going to have an H2 with the word settings. If we save that and go to our page, then it looks a little bit different, right? Now there is also, if you see here, a CSS file, and it imports styles. And if we go to the styles, then we see a lot of things, mainly a class called settings. So let's apply it. The way how we can apply it is by writing class name, opening parentheses, because it needs to be a JavaScript, as styles is basically a variable that holds all your CSS styles. And let's write styles.settings. And if we save that and check it again, now it's a little bit in the center. And there is also one thing that we can add called frosted, which is a generic style that I got from index CSS called frosted. Those are all the properties that give us this glassmorphism look. So if we save that and we go here, then there you go. That's our beautiful, beautiful little settings. This doesn't give us much, right? This is just like text and a little bit of CSS. What we're actually here for is to change our hard-coded query to something else. So let's start with it. We're going to call it category or category. Start with an H4. Also, let me know in the comments below, is category or category? So we have our little div, and here is going to be again class name, boom, 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 styles.settings, and let's write something just to see what we have. You see now it's all full in red, and that happens because we don't have a parent element. In React, you cannot have several elements on the same level. This is a sibling, another sibling, and another sibling. It needs to have one parent. This syntax is, I think, from React 16. It's the equivalent of fragment. However you prefer to write it, you can do that, or you can do this. Let's try this one out. I'm not usually using that. I'm usually using fragment, but why not? Open to changes here. Let's check what it looks like. It looks very nice. We did it wrong. We don't need this parent because we have our other parent, this one. Yeah, that's how it looks like. Cool. So now, if you remember, we had 4 radio boxes here, and a radio box already exists as a component. So let's check that one out. As always, very simple, has nothing. Where would we get our categories from? We can check a file called constants, where I put all of the things that we kind of have as a base to start with. If you want to change them here. So then all the logic in all of the components work the same, and you don't need to change it in different places. You just have one dedicated file where you're changing your things. For example, an abstract can be flowers, and then you don't need to change it anywhere else. You know that it works everywhere else without touching any other code. So only this file is going to be touched. Let's import our categories to our settings file. Import categories from, we're going up and out, and we're going to our constants. Save it. And now in this div, we're going to make a loop because we have 4 categories. For every category, we want to have a radio box. Categories.map, we're going to use item. And for this item, we are going to use the radio box. See, Visual Studio Code already suggests me, so I'm gonna press on enter. It imported what I needed and put it here. But of course, it's a component, so we're gonna be doing it like that. Let's pass to it a key, which is mandatory, item, and as well as a name. It's also gonna be our item. Save it, and let's go to our radio box. In our radio box, we need to accept or expect the name prop that we just passed, which is this one. The key is not gonna be passed down because it's something that React keeps for itself. So we're gonna be expecting only name for now. Name, and we can do maybe just like a fun, but very fun thing, name, just to see how things work. So there we go, we have abstract, people, animals, and nature. Now we need to zhuzh up our radio box. First, we're gonna have a div, of course. Inside of that div, we're gonna have an input of radio. Do we have it here? There we go. And it already suggests us that we need to have a name, which is going to be our name. ID also going to be our name, because we know they're all unique, so we are fine with using those everywhere. And as well as our value is going to be name. Then we also need a label for that. This one, what is it going to be? You guessed it, it's going to be a name. And of course, this one is also going to be a name, because you want the label to show something. There's also some class names that we can add. Again, you know, we import the styles, so we're opening curly brackets, doing this shebang, and writing styles.radiobox. Save it, and let's see what we're getting. Ooh, alrighty. That's not bad. Did we miss maybe a style here? Yeah, this should be a setting in singular. And there you go. Now it's what we wanted. So now if you click on it, nothing happens because we didn't add the events for it. Before we add an event for it, we need to store somewhere the information which category is selected, at least as a default. So I guess you could guess what we're gonna be using. Yeah. It's going to be a useState. So const. Here you can see how we're changing the name, but it's essentially the same structure and the same convention. Category, set category equals useState, imported above. As a default, it's going to be our categories 0. So whichever category we have the first in our array of categories, set it as our default. And again, you see, I didn't hard code here abstract or people or something. We're only using the categories that we have from our constants. Now we can extend our props and we can call them selected item is going to be the category, and an onChange event, which is also a prop. We want, in this onChange event, we want to use the set category and pass it the value of the radio box. Put the radio box here on the side. I'm going to close the navbar, still see everything. Here's our radio box. You know what? Let's start first with the selected item. Let's not confuse ourselves further. Choose the selected item, copy it, and add it here to our props. And in our input, we have an attribute called checked, and we're going to add it here, selected item. But that's not going to give us much, right? Because it's going to be abstract, people, or whatever other category you're inserting there. We need to know if our selected item is the same as the name of this specific radio box, because we have 4 of them. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to create here const is checked equals name selected item. So what it's going to return to us, it's every time that the radio box is getting rendered or being passed props, it's going to update this variable, which I misspelled, and it's going to basically check if name equals to selected item, then isChecked is going to be true, else it's going to be false. Now in the checked, we're going to be using isChecked. Save it and see if we have something. You see now our abstract has the selected kind of indication. If we maybe put the category to 1, our second one should have it. There you go, people. Cool. Revert it, set it to 1. Our onChange events, you can actually see that in our console. You provided a checked prop to a form field without an onChange handler. And that's what we're going to be doing right now. Let's add our onChange prop. We're going to keep it empty for now. Take this onChange prop and add it to our radio box props that we're expecting. On our input field, just attach it. Just like that, you know, just like onChange is onChange. And the functionality of onChange, we're gonna define it here. Basically, what we want is that whenever something is changing, so whenever a user is clicking on a radio box, we want it to set the category to whichever category the user clicked on. We could use the set category. We would need to have the value of the radio box that was clicked. This will be available to us through e.target.value, because if you see here in our input field, we added our value, so we're gonna know it. However, you cannot just, first of all, it's erroring because it doesn't know what e means. This is usually the event that is being fired. It's an object. You can console log, can check it out what it's there. If we're gonna keep it like this is gonna be fired immediately as soon as the component is rendered. And that's not what we want. We want it to be fired only when an onChange event happens. So for that, we need to pass it as a function. You open parentheses, you define parentheses, you write an arrow, and you pass here the e, which is the event. Save it. Ideally, now this should work. We should have our set category working and setting our category. If we change our radio boxes, it should be reflected. Let's check. Let's refresh it. So if I click on people, animals, you see it changes. We're done with categories. Let's do a little bit of propTypes before we're done with the radio box. Radio box dot propTypes equals, you open an object, name selected item on change. Name is going to be propTypes dot string dot is required, because we do have to have it. Selected item is also going to be a string, and an onChange instead of a string is going to be a function. Save it. Now, for example, if we don't pass the name, we go back, you see we have a warning, failed prop type. The prop name is marked as required in the radio box, but its value is undefined. And if we bring it back, save it, then should not have this error anymore. Now let's do the same thing, but for our pace. If we go to our constants, we have a pace of easy, medium, hard, and pro. So let's import that. Since we already have categories here, we just added 2 things to import, and we have pace. Copy down our category, and it's going to be, was that pace or difficulty? Let's make it as a pace, and then we can check if that makes sense. We can also copy those things actually and put it here, but we need to change pace. Here we have category, which is going to be pace. We still didn't create it, just a moment. And here also pace. And you see, it's very like copy pasty, and that's why I like working with components. You're just changing a little bit of the data, and voila, we got it. How cool is that? Oh no, something is wrong. Wait, pace onChange, set pace. I have a set pace here. Let's refresh. Yeah, okay. Needed a refresh. Happens. Now we need our last thing, which is our amount of cards. And this one is a little bit different. So first of all, we're gonna be using a component called counter. Let me close the radio box. We don't need that for now. All counter. Let's see. Beautiful as always. Nothing much included in here. Let me close the other stuff. There we go. Let's add in here our counter. It's again going to be an H4. How do we call it? Cards? Amount of cards. And let's also copy this div. We are of course going to have the same div for all of our settings. And in this div, we're going to include our counter. As always, if your code editor doesn't add those components automatically, don't forget to import them and yeah, put them a little bit up. Why is that GS6? We don't need the GS6. That was a funny import. We don't need those things because we have an index file where it does the import export thingy. Cool, we have our category, amount of cards, which is nothing yet, and the pace. Awesome, we're moving great. So let's go back to our counter component, has nothing, but in ideal world, it needs to have a plus, a minus, and those plus and minuses, they need to increase or decrease the amount of cards. But also we have a limit of how low it can go, as well as how high it can go. First, let's add the skeleton. It's going to be a div with the class quantity. What I did now, it was emmet, and that was included, or that is included in Visual Studio Code. Highly recommend learning a bit of the hotkeys for it. It's really nice. In here, we're doing a little bit different. We're not importing styles, just to show you that it's possible, and also because we have this before, afters, and all those things, and sometimes it can like play weird games with you. Just so you know that it's intentional. Then we're going to have a button. First button on the left is going to be the minus button. Cool, and it's going to have a minus. Then we're going to have a span with the class of quantity, and it's going to have, let's say, 8, and another button with plus. So now if we save it and we go to our page, woo, how beautiful is that? So several problems. Our buttons do nothing. Our quantity is static. We need to change that. 2 ways how we could do that. As always, there is more things. It always depends on everything. But how we're going to be doing that? Or no, let me tell you how. There are 2 clear ways how we could do that. We could import our constants, add them here. So the one where we have like the amount of cards, we could straight away have it here and have the state here, and then return it to our settings. Or, as I prefer, we're just going to extend it in here and have it all in one place. So we know that, okay, the settings component has all of our consts, has all the responsibility of setting the state, and it's all in there. So we're going to do what I say. Cards count and set cards count. It's going to be, what was that? Initial cards count. In our case, it's not going to be a 0, right? Because it's just a string, or no, it's a number. And it's red because we do need to include it. In order to make our 8 in our counter not hard-coded, let's pass it as a variable, cards count, cards count. And now when we go to our counter, we know that we are going to have a prop called cards count. And here again, let me tell you one more time, cards count. There we go. If you now change in the constants this to 12, save it and refresh it, then that's going to be 12. Okay, revert it back to 8. Now let's add some dummy functions or dummy event listeners that are going to listen to our clicks on the buttons. So both buttons, they are going to have an on-click event. They're just going to be different events, right? Because one is to increase and another one is to decrease. Let's create 2 functions. One is const on decrement. I hope this word is okay. It's not that common, right? Increment is, but decrement is not that common of a word. At least I haven't heard it that much. And another one is going to be on increment. Now let's add them. On click is going to be here on the decrement, and on increment is going to be on our plus sign. Both of the functions need to have passed the event and need to have a e.preventDefault. Now let's console log. What are we going to console log? We have nothing to console log. What happens now? First refresh. Every time we click on the plus, we want it to go up by 2, as well as if you click on minus, we want to go down by 2, because cards always come in pairs. So if I want to play with 5 images, it's going to be 10 cards. We need to define this const for us. Let's call it step equals 2. So we define our step, but before we actually go to the step, we also need to somehow send the information of the change that we're making. It needs to be sent to our settings component, because here we're changing the cards amount, but we need that to be reflected through our set cards count and later on in the cards count. Let's pass the set cards count as an on-click prop to our counter. This way, in here, on click, we can call it in here. The amount that we currently have is our cards count. Whenever we decrement, we're going to do cards count minus step, because we don't do -2, we do minus step. This variable, or whatever this equals to, we want to send it to our on-click function. You know what I mean? So then our on-click is a masked set cards count. Let's do that here. Let's do an on-click like this, just to see that things work. Save it. We change the decrement. This should work. You see that with our decrement, we can go into minus, and that's a no-no for us. So let's fix that. Before we send this on click, we need to check what we have here. So let's extract this to a variable, const number equals this. And then we need to check if number is bigger or equal to. Only then we want to do the on click event, and we're going to pass it the number because we have already stored. Now that we have our decrement logic, this is sort of the same thing that is going to happen in our increment. So if we go here, the only thing we need to do is a plus. We're going to limit our number to 160. This way you can play with 80 images in total. And of course it's not bigger than it's smaller or equal 160. Refresh it. And now if we go on plus, we have it. And if we go on minus, it always does 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. And we should not go less than that. Awesome, works. So let's also not forget about our prop types. It's gonna be counter dot like this, and just copy pasting things, you know. Cards count is prop types dot number is required, and an on click is a prop types dot function dot is required. Save it, go back, refresh, and hope that everything works again. There we go, perfect. Now that we have our little settings menu, the only thing we're missing is the start game button. So let's create that one. We will need to go to our settings. At the bottom of it, we're going to create a button. And the class name is going to be, again, this like funky thing, styles.button. And we're also gonna add frosted to it. And it's gonna be saying start. Save it and let's see how it looks like. Nice, loving it. Now the only thing we need to add is an on-click event. On-click. Let's name it or on start game click. If I have some typos, they're going to be dragged out throughout the whole project. That's very typical of me. Const on start game click is a function, and what we're gonna do with this function is we're gonna pass whatever we have in the settings, we're gonna pass it to our app component, to our parent, because the parent is the one that has the settings, and once we are done with our settings, we want to hide them and show our game. And it's also the place where we are fetching the images, so it just all makes sense to pass it back to the parent and then let the parent work with it. Let's create here a function, const in our app start game. Let's console log options, and the options are going to be what we're passing to this function, what we're calling it. Start game, we're going to pass it to the settings. It's going to be start game. Save it. Let's go to settings, expect the prop, and in here pass start game, and we're going to pass the category, paste, and cards count. Let me close up all of those things. So now you see, we have our button, and the button has an on-click event. Once you click on the button, it's going to call the on start game click function, and when it calls that, it's going to call the start game prop function that was passed to our settings component, and it's gonna land here and console log our options. So let's see what we get. Let's change it to 14, medium, and nature. No, let's keep abstract. We had nature before. And click start. Okay, we have abstract. So it basically console logged our first thing. Let's pass it as an object. Object, what was it? 14, 16, medium, start. And there we go. We have abstract, we have our paste medium, and our cards count is 16. Yay! Now that this works, let's go back to our app. Those options, we need to pass them to this hook. And actually, we want to take those options and use them in our request. So if we want to pass these options to this hook, we need to store them again in a useState. So let's call it game options and set game options equals useState, and it's going to be an empty object. In here, once we get them, we are going to do set game options with options, and game options are going to be passed to this hook. Actually, we could have them as a null, and then in our useGetImages, in our custom hook, we have this useEffect. So we're going to be expecting game options here. We can check if the game options, if they're not there, if they're null, then return. Let's see. Refresh, images array is 0. And then if we click on start, we got our images array of 0 again. And we also need to pass here the game options. So we want to be listening to whenever our game options change, then to fire the fetch of the pictures. Let's refresh. Now we have only images array of 0, and let's add 12, 14, click on it, and there we go, we have them. Awesome. Now that we are passing the game options, we also want to use them. So our query is going to be game options dot category per page is going to be cards count. So now we can remove those to-dos Let's do 14 again, start. And there we go, we got 14 images. But that's not correct because that's the amount of cards. The amount of images needs to be divided by 2. If we have the user wanting to play with 14 cards, we need to request only 7 images. So what we need to do is just divide by 2. Let's save it again. And now if we do 18, it should request only 9 images. And there we go, we got it. Nice. Now, did we forget about some props? Yes, of the start game. Let's use it. Is going to be propTypes dot function dot is required. Now comes the part where we need to display the images. Let's do a thing. If we have the images, because we know, so this console log is actually being fired twice. Once when we have 0 and once when we actually fetch something. I mean, in general, this console log is going to get fired as often as the component refreshes itself or gets updated with new information. We need to check. If we have images.length, which is bigger than 0, then we want to render a board. And the board, it didn't import, so let's do that ourselves. Save it, and let's go and check what the board has. Nothing, as always. The board is here. Cool. One thing that I would like to do before we continue forward is to change a little bit this situation. I want to display the board only if we have some images, but also the fetching of the images and all of those things can have some implications. We need the loader. If maybe there was an error or something went wrong, we still don't need to show the settings themselves. So what I'm thinking is to change it up a little bit and display settings or board depending on our game options. This is also going to help us once we are resetting our game. So once the user has won and wants to start a new game, that's gonna sort of help us. This way we can isolate the app component to be responsible only for being like, hey, who is getting the candy? You know, is it you or is it you? Did you do your homework? Did you do your this? Did you do your that? You know, the parent. If there are no game options, right, because they're null, then I want to render settings. Else, I want to render the board, and we can remove those because they are not needed. That would mean that this hook cannot be called in here. Not that it cannot, but it should not. It doesn't align with our logic anymore. Cut it out from here, remove the console log of images as well as this, and we are going to go to our board and we're going to add it in here. For that, let's import our hook, use get images from use get images. And the game options are underlined because we don't have them, so we need to expect them. Game options, we're going back to our app and our board is going to expect the game options. And in here we could log our images again to just see that things are working. Let's try. Refresh it. Let's do 6, start, 3, board. Awesome. We don't see the settings anymore. We see what is supposed to be our board with our cards, and we know that we have fetched 3 images to work with. What we could do next is to add a tiny loader because, you know, sometimes things can take a little while until we fetch something. Let's create a const is loading and set is loading, and we're going to add it to our useState, and by default it's going to be true because whenever this component is loaded, we are most likely fetching images. We are going to have a useEffect that is going to listen to our images, these ones. So whenever our images are getting updated, we can check if images.length bigger than 0, then set is loading to false. And now the best part, how can we see that this thing actually works? We can do a div is loading and let's add paragraph tag loading. Save it and let's see what happens. So we refresh the page, we start, see it was loading and then it disappeared. Cool. But of course we also have a loader which we can use. Import loader from loader. We have if is loading, then display our loader. Save it and let's see what happens now. Start. We had a tiny bloop bloop and that's it. Cool. So you see, the board is going to be responsible for those things. Of course, you could create like an additional wrapper, so not the board is specifically responsible for that, but kind of like have the app, something in the middle, and then the board, and the board is only displaying the cards, but up to you. You can really go as nested as you want. Okay, so now that we have the images, it's time to do something with those images. And to our surprise, we have a hook called useGameLogic, which again contains nothing, but that's where we're going to be building our game logic. Let's close the other ones to the right, save this one. First, let's add our prop types, just not to forget it. Board.propTypes, game options. Since game options is an object, we're gonna define the props a little bit different. So we define propTypes.shape, and you define what you're expecting inside. So we're expecting the pace, cards, count, and category. propTypes.string is required, comma, and then in our cards count is a number, and our category is a string again. Save it, should be fine. Start. Okay, it didn't break, nice. Now we will need to build our game logic, and let's maybe pass the images to it. This is going to expect images, and we can console log here the images, and in here we are going to use our use game logic. We're going to pass the images that we're getting, but also we're gonna want to get something back, and for us it's gonna be our cards, because the cards are eventually the things that we want to display. Since we know that the images are being fetched, so they're asynchronously given to us, we need to have a useEffect for those images. And only if images.length is bigger than 0, then we can, let's call a function we didn't create yet, but it's going to be called prepare cards. And let's also create this function, const prepare cards. We actually don't need to pass the images to it because the images are passed to our custom hook, so we can just use that. And in here we can console log our images. So now let's see how often we're gonna have our console log. Only once, and once we got the images. Great. Now, what are our cards? Our cards are nothing at the moment. First of all, we don't return anything. That's why it cannot be anything. It's going to be undefined. And here as well, we really don't have cards. So we have our function called prepare cards. If we check our utils folder, we have an index file. So let's check what we have there. We have 4 functions here. We have get form data, get paired picks, add unique IDs, and shuffle cards. Before we go into it, let's define what's what. Let me show you which data I expect our cards to have. I want every card to have an ID. With this ID, we can pair or match the pair of the card, because we have one image that we fetch, but this image appears twice. And we need to find when the user flips the cards if it's the same image or not. So an ID is a great way to compare it by, with, against, you know what I mean. Then we of course need the URL in order to display that image. We also need to have an is shown flag, which is going to tell us basically if the card is shown or not. And based on that, our styling is going to change. Also, we will need to keep in mind that we need to show only 2 cards at a time. And as well, we need to have a flag that is called is found in order to know if that card was found and then not allow it to be flipped, and to keep track how many cards are left for the user before it won. Another thing that I don't mention here is the unique ID. We need to have an ID per card, which is not unique. 2 cards are going to have the same ID, but then we also need to have a unique ID in order for us to understand with which card we're working. Now, you could say that we could use index for that unique ID, but we cannot do that because we are going to shuffle the cards. It can be generated based on an index back then, but we cannot rely on an index, and we need to actually set it as a key in our object. Let's add our unique ID to this thing so we just know it. Our unique ID to keep track of the specific card. We have our prepare cards, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to form the data that we want. Prepare cards is going to be a wrapper function that is going to call all of our 4 functions that we have in our utils folder. So it's going to be not pretty. You can do and you can choose whatever naming you want. At this point, I decided to go with a equals, and we're gonna be using the get formed data. We want to form a data object per image. You see we have ID, URL, is shown, and is found. Copy this one, call it here, and pass the images to it. We don't have the get formed data. We need to import it from utils, save it, and we can console log our A. And if we check our A here, we're gonna see that we have an ID, an is found, is shown, and a URL. Perfect. But you see that we don't have a unique ID yet. And also we have only 4 images. They are not repeating themselves at all. So we still don't have the cards. Next, we're gonna do a const B. And this one, we are gonna call our get paired pics. So basically, we're going to loop over our images, so over our array of the data that we just created, and we're gonna take one image, duplicate it, and put it right next to the other. Take get paired pics, import it, and call it here. What you're going to pass to it is going to be a. Every time we're calling more functions here, we are calling one function, passing initially the images, getting something back, then calling another function, passing what we got, getting something back, and like this, and like this, and like this. It looks kind of like a, what is it? A lot of Z's. After we got the paired pictures, we would want to add the unique IDs to them. Or maybe let's console log and see what we got. So here's our B. You see A we had 4, now B is 8 because we added paired pictures. So you see our ID 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 3, 3. They are exactly the same as whatever was copied. There were 4 entries and each of them got copied and put right next to the one that was copied from. Now comes const C. And we're going to add the unique IDs. Unique IDs, how we're doing it, we're as well looping over it. We're basically taking whatever we had in that object. We're still keeping that, but we're extending that object with a unique ID that is based on the index at that time. Add unique IDs, and we're passing it B. We can do console log of a C, and of course, don't forget to import it. So we had 8, we had ID is found, is shown, and a URL. And now if we open it, we should have ID is found, is shown, unique ID, and a URL. Perfect. And last but definitely not least, const D equals to whatever is next. What do we have left? Our shuffle card. This is something that I didn't create. This is I don't remember what's the name of it, but there is a whole theory to that, how to shuffle things, and somebody on Stack Overflow wrote it in JavaScript. I took it, put it here. You're welcome. Don't forget to import it, shuffle cards, C, and now we can console log D. See how we have here 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3. Shouldn't be like that now. Now it's 2, 3, 0, 0, 1, 3, 2, 1. Awesome. Now this D needs to be set as our cards. First, let's create a const. For the cards, useState. Initially, it's gonna be an empty array. At the end of here, we can do the set cards and we can set it with D. And don't forget to return from our hook the cards. Save it, go back to the board, and now that we have the cards, should we go wild and actually attempt to loop over them? Let's try. So first, if it's not loading, only if it's not loading, then we want to take the cards.map. Let's output the card.unique ID. What did I do? Of course, I need to do like this. And there we go. You can barely see it, but it's there. It's 156047332. Instead of outputting a paragraph tag, we can actually use a card component that we have, which I need to import card. And let's open that card for a second before we're passing things to it. I guess the card is going to accept the card. And then in here we can do card.unique ID. Save it. And let's go to the board. In the board, we have a card. We're going to pass the card as a card. And there we go. And the key, don't forget it. You can do card.unique ID. And there we go. Did it work? It worked. Cool. Okay, so one thing that I already see is that we can do here, if it's loading, do a loader, else let's do this thing. Let's work a little bit with the styling of our card. It's going to be a lot of divs with a lot of class names. I'm just going to copy this and I'm going to add it again and again and again. Each of those is going to have styles.container. This one is going to have styles.card, styles.front, and styles.back. In the back, we are going to have the image itself. And yes, of course, there is a component for that. Image. And let's see what it accepts. Nothing. So we're going to pass it the URL. What it's going to return is going to be a div with an image. The source is going to be the URL of it. We're not going to have any alt attributes because then the user could hover on it and kind of trick. The whole idea is to click on things and then see them. So yeah, not accessible, but I would not know how to do this card game otherwise. And of course, we also need to have the width just to ease on our browser when it's going to be rendering the images. So the width is going to be a set one of 200. Let's not forget our props. Image.propTypes is going to be URL. propTypes.string.is required, because we cannot render an image without the string of the URL. Now we're going to pass the URL as card.url. And of course, let's not forget to import the image component. Look at this, beautiful. We have those, but they're flipped. So what we need to do next is to flip the card. At first, when we click on the card, where would that click happen? It would happen on the top, so on the parent of the whole card, right? We're not going to put it on the card, on the front, on the back, on the image. It's going to happen on the whole box that the user sees. So on click, we're going to just pass an on-click event that we are going to pass as a prop to our card. Now, this means that we need to go up to our board to see where we are having our card. And in here, we promise that we are passing an on-click event, which in here we're going to call on-card-click. Now, this on-card-click, since all of our cards coming from our useGame logic, this is going to come from our hook. In order to get it from our hook, let's first create it in our hook. So const on card click, let's log an event, and now we can return this function to wherever we're using this hook. Let's return it as an object, because then it's easier and you don't need to worry about the order in which you are returning things. We're going to the board, do a deconstruct here, add it on card click. So now if we click on it, we should see something, but we don't. Do I refresh it? Okay, again, my hot reload. That's fine. One thing that I do see now is that my on-card click is going to depend on an event, but why would I do that if I actually can catch it in the card? So I can do here const on click, because this card component is isolated per card. So I have all the information of the card that I need. So I don't need to dig into like e.target.event. whatever. I could actually just pass it on straight away. On click, I want to pass an on card click, and on card click, I want to pass a card.unique ID, because that's what I'm interested in when I'm clicking on a card. I want the unique ID so I can understand on which card did I click. Card.unique ID. Add some space in between, because why not? Now in here, it's going to be on card click. Save it. And if we go to our game logic, on card click is going to have unique ID. Need to refresh it, start, and if I click, there we go, unique ID. Awesome. So we got our unique ID, and now we need to use this unique ID in order to flip our card. Let's create a function called flip card. Const flip card, and we can remove this, and maybe not unique ID, but maybe we can call it clicked card ID. And here we can have our clicked card ID. So what we're going to be doing now, we're going to be looping through all of our cards, and we're going to find the card that was clicked on, and we're going to change the is shown from false to true. Cards.map card. If card.unique ID equals to clicked card ID, then we want the card dot is shown to be equal to true. And then we want to return the card. And where do we return it to? To a const called flip cards. Once this is done, we want to do a set cards with our flipped cards. Sounds okay? Let's see. Refresh, start, and if we click on it, nothing really happens. Let's see what went wrong. First, let's check if we're getting here, but I think we already saw that we did. If I refresh it, start, click on it, we get there. Let's go to flipped card, and we're going to do a console.log, and I'm gonna add this thing here to see if we also get there. We do. What happens next? I assume that actually everything is changing, but the only thing that doesn't happen is that we didn't add the styles to reflect it through our CSS. We need to go to our card. We're going to add another JavaScript moment here where we're going to check card is shown, question mark, so that's ternary operator. If it is shown, then add styles.flipped, else don't add anything. Or an empty string. And let's see, there we go, there is our card. So now if we do it again, we can flip all of them. Nice. However, now we have an issue. I said that we want to flip only 2 cards at one time. And as you can see, you can keep on flipping every card you wish. So we need to change that. First of all, what we can do is in our useGame logic, we can add a variable that is going to store the amount of visible cards that we have. useState. Or actually, it's not going to store our amount. It's going to store the cards themselves or the unique IDs. Let's see. But for now, it's an empty array. So back in our flip card, once we loop over the cards and we flip one to make it shown. After we do that, we need to check if card dot is shown, then we need to set the visible cards with new data. And since it's an array and we just want to extend the array, we take the old state and the array, we spread the old state that we already have and we extend it with a card dot, let's store the unique ID in it, okay? So we don't want to overwrite, we want to just take whatever the old state is. So let's say I already have one unique ID in there. I'm telling JavaScript or React, hey, take the ID that I already have, spread it back into this array and add also a new ID that I'm just working with right now. This way, we can keep track of how many visible cards we have, and on our card click we can restrict or we can stop flipping more cards since we have already 2 cards flipped. So we could check here if visible cards dot length is smaller than 2, then we can do the flip card. And why am I doing here smaller than 2 is because first the click is going to happen and then the flip is going to happen. So if I have 1 card flipped and then I want to flip the second one, I click on it, I check this, the visible card is 1, and then I flip it, and by this time I have 2 visible cards. So the third time that I click on a card or a third card I click on would not go forward. As you know, I'm not a fan of doing this, so we're gonna add it to a variable called max visible cards, and we're gonna define it up here. Const max visible cards equals 2. Cool. So only if that stands, we can do a flip card. Let's see if that works actually. Refresh the page. Let's do 4 cards. 1, 2, and now I cannot click on it. Awesome. Now we need to flip them back though. The way how we're gonna flip the cards back is going to be with set timeout. And that's when our pace is gonna come into play. If you remember, we have our pace of easy, medium, hard, and pro. We need to match it with set timeout values. How are we gonna know when we want to flip a card? We could say that we want to flip a card if this condition is true. But what if I don't click on a card? What if I just have 2 of them flipped and I know that, okay, now it's time to flip them back and start guessing next. For that, we're gonna use a useEffect. We're gonna be listening to our visible cards, and if visible cards dot length is bigger or equal max visible cards, then we want to flip them. And I say bigger or equal because the set state of whatever we're doing, set visible cards, is asynchronous. So maybe somehow by magical coincidence it happened that it jumped to 3. We still want to be kind of like, whoop, we didn't see anything. What we're gonna do here, we're gonna write set timeout. We're gonna set our visible cards to an empty array. And we're gonna do that. Usually you can define here 1,000, which equals to 1 second. Let's see how that one works. You start, play after 1 second. It didn't flip. Why it didn't flip? We just set the visible cards array to an empty array, but we didn't actually change the isShown flag that we had. So in our useEffect, let's create a const updated cards. This naming is going to change and the place of this thing is going to change, so don't bother too much. But it's not going to be a function. It's going to be cards.map card. You could do to every card, you can just do card is shown equals false, and that will do it. And then here you can do set cards to updated cards, or you don't have to do it to every card. You could actually check if visible cards dot index of card dot unique ID does not equal -1. Let me put that on another line like this. So we're looping over the cards array. We're taking the card, check if the card that we're looping over at this moment, the unique ID of which, does the visible cards contain this unique ID? And you can do it by checking the index of this unique ID. If it's going to be -1, it means that it's out of this array because it cannot find the index of it. But if the index is not -1, it means that it is inside of there and we found the card that is flipped, that is visible, and we can do card is shown equals false. And of course, at the end, we need to return the card. 2 ways to go about it. Choose whichever you like. Refresh, start, 2 of them flipped. Woohoo! Awesome. Now, what we need to change is the interval. Our set timeout needs to be not only 1,000, because we have established here that we have easy, medium, hard, and pro. Easy, medium, hard, and pro don't translate into time, into seconds, so we need to do that for us. What we're gonna do, we're gonna create another array with const paces. You know, we have a pace and we're gonna do paces equals to an object, and the object is gonna be easy, which is going to be 1.5 seconds, medium is going to be a second, hard is going to be half a second, and pro is going to be even less. So easy, medium, hard, and pro, they are the same as we have in our constants here in our pace, easy, medium, hard, and pro. In our set timeout, we can do paces. It's an object, so we can access it with the information that we already have. Do we have it in here? No, we don't. So remember, in our app, we have our options, or game options, and our game options are being passed to our board. One of those options is the pace. So let's go to our board, and where we're doing the game logic, we need to pass game options.pace. We don't need to pass the whole thing. We can just pass the pace because we're only interested in that. So now if we go to the game logic, we pass game pace or pace, whatever you prefer. We pass it here. What it's going to translate it to? It's going to be paces, which is our object, and the game pace is easy, medium, hard, or pro. It's going to access it. It's going to do paces.easy, and the value of it is, for example, 1500. The way how we can check it is, of course, going to our page, refresh it. Let's select a pro, which gave us 200 milliseconds, start, and then as soon as I click the second card, after 200 milliseconds, it should flip them back. There you go. We can check it out and do an easy one, which is 1.5 seconds. I do this. You see, that was longer. Cool, so that works. The next thing we need to do is, as you saw just now, I had 2 of those cards and they're actually a match, but it's not reflected. I can keep on playing with them. It doesn't update that I actually found a match, so let's fix that. In our useEffect, which one was it? It's this one, visible cards. This if is still valuable for us, but the whole information that we have here, we're gonna move that somewhere else. We're gonna move it to a function called check match. Copy it now, everything, yep. And then call the check match in here. Why is this if still important? Is because we want to check if it's a match only if we have 2 cards. If you have 1 card visible, there's really no sense in checking if it's a match with another card that you still didn't flip. Only if there are 2 cards visible, then we want to do a check of the match and flip them back. That's why we copied everything to this function, but before we do this, we need to check the match. So how are we gonna check if something is a match or not? We have our array of visible cards. This array has our unique IDs of those cards. So what we need to do, let's scroll up to the top. Each card has an ID, unique ID, and it's found in URL. Focus on ID and unique ID. The visible cards, this one, contains 2 unique IDs. We're at the point where we have 2 flip cards. Visible cards have 2 unique IDs in them. We need to loop over our cards array, find those 2 cards that are flipped, and then we need to compare their IDs, because that's why we have our ID where we're matching the pair. We're gonna filter throughout the cards array, find the unique ID that is matching the cards' unique IDs, store it in a variable, and then compare the 2 matched ones that we found. If their IDs match, then it's a match. So as I said, we're gonna do cards.filter because we wanna only get the information of the cards that are matching our criteria. So it's gonna have a card, and we want this filter to return us only a card, unique ID of which was found in the visible cards. Sounds familiar? Kind of familiar, right? We can even copy that and just put it in here. Here we can do const visible. Let's console log what we get in this visible. There we go. We have an array of 2. The ID is the same. Were those cards the same? Yeah, they were. You see? We have here the unique IDs. Unique IDs are different, which is how we can actually identify this specific card. But now for the image itself, we know that we can compare the IDs of them. They are the same. It means that it's a match. And if it's a match, I should not be able to click on those cards again. How we can check that is const matched equals visible is an array. Matched is going to be visible 0.id equals to visible 1.id. How am I so bold that I'm assuming that I'm gonna have 2 items? Well, because I did have this if here. It has to be or bigger than 2 or equal to 2. Most likely it's gonna be equal to 2. Now that we have our matched, which is gonna be true or false, we also have our another loop of our map where we again searching for our unique ID card in the visible cards. So we're targeting specifically the card that is visible right now. And we also have a flag that is called isFound. And for this one, we're just going to put the matched. Matched can be true or false. If those were 2 different cards that didn't match, match is gonna be false, and the card that is found is gonna keep on being false. To avoid doing match, then true, else, then false, we can really just use the matched because we are doing already a comparison here. So let's see. Actually, wait a second. Let me not do the same mistake I did already twice. I need to change the CSS of the card. Similarly, how we had with the card is shown, our front needs to have card.isFound. If so, then styles.found, and else an empty string. Now I think we're ready to test it out. Let's do for cards, start, boom, is the same. Flip it and you see, oh, you can still flip it. Oh no. Okay, this is something we still need to fix. But you see the difference? Those two cards are found and these ones aren't. So what do we need to do in order to stop the card from being flipped once it's shown is to tackle the place where it's being clicked on. So in here, we need to check if card.isShown or card.isFound. In two of those conditions, we are not going to allow the user to proceed with any logic of the game for that specific card. So we're going to return out of it. And if we save it now and go back to our game, refresh it, of course, keep it as 4, I found the same ones and I cannot click on them anymore. Okay, now what we have left is to keep the score, right? Let's put it to 4. If I'm winning, here you go. I found all of my cards and I cannot keep on playing anymore. I'm maxed out. Something needs to happen. First, I see that we're not using the propTypes. We're gonna do card.propTypes, card.propTypes.shape, because it is an object with a lot of things there. It has a URL, it has an isShown, an ID, a unique ID. Well, we're actually not using the ID in the unique ID, do we? No, we're using the unique ID, but not the ID. So we don't need to ensure that it's passed to us and is found. URL, propTypes.string, that is very much required. Then unique ID is also a string. Is shown though is a boolean and is found as well. Save it. And then we also have our own card click, which is outside of our card, and it's propTypes.func.is required as well. Cool. So we can close the card actually. Constant, so we also don't need index, image. Do we add propTypes to the image? Yes. So in order to understand if we're done with the game or not, we should be keeping a score. For that, let's create 2 variables which are going to be score, set score, and the use state of it is going to be 0. Let's start with this one first. Our score needs to be updated. Let me remove this console log. Once we got a match, and a match we got here. If matched, we should set score. No, we should update the score. And let's go here. And in update score, we're going to use the set score. And here we're going to do in a similar way how we did before, old score. So we had an old state. Now you can see that you can name it as you want. Main thing is that it's using the existing state, so the older one, before you are going to change it. Old score +1. And now we need to observe the score. And we're not going to be sending the score to our board. I'm going to be actually doing a useEffect for it. And I want to keep an eye on the score. And if my score equals to the images.length, and attention, not cards.length, it's images.length, because I fetched 4 images, and if my score is 4, that I found 4 matches, it means that I won. I'm not comparing it against the cards, although you could, but then you would need to update the score and increment it by 2 every time, which is also fine. It's just a, personal preference. A tiny caveat that I noticed when I was developing it is that initially our images.length is 0 and our score is also 0. So automatically the computer and JavaScript think that the user has won, but they didn't. So we need to ensure that images.length, and that automatically means that it's bigger than 0, because a 0 is falsy. So if images.length is bigger than 0 and the score equals to images.length, then the user has won. And for that, we're going to use another variable, and it's gonna be const is win set is win, and useState initially gonna be false, of course. Copy the set is win, go to the bottom where we added the useEffect, and set is win true. Now, in order to do something with this win, let's pass it back to our board, or just pass it to our board, is win, save it, expect it here, is win, and surprise, surprise, I have another component for you. If is win, then let's render the component that is called result. Save it and let's see what's happening. 4 cards, failed prop type of type numbers applied to card expected string. Okay, I need to change that. Let's check our win situation. Got 2 cards, nice. Another 2, result, nice. We got it. First of all, the card is of a wrong prop type. The unique ID is a number, which is correct. It is number because we are taking it from the index. Let's go to our result component. There you go, an untouched one. The way how this component looks like is div with a sophisticated class name again, styles.container, and as well as frosted, of course. And here we can add a paragraph tag of awesome. Let's see. There we go. There's our awesome one. What we want to do is to add here a button that once we're done with the game, it's going to kind of restart the game and bring us to our settings where we can select again some characteristics of our memory game and play again. Let's add a button with finish game. Class name, again, very sophisticated. You know I love those. Styles.button. Save it. Not as sophisticated as I hoped. Right, it's of course missing the frosted. There we go. This button needs to do something, right? As we said, on click, we're going to pass a restart, reset, restart game. Let's expect it as props and as well define it as props. So .propTypes equals propTypes.function is also required. Back to our board, in our result, we are going to expect a restart game. However, our restart game is not going to happen on the board. It's going to happen in our app component, in our parent component, where we're talking to the settings. Let's pass it on. Restart game. Let's add it here. propTypes.func is required. And we're going to our app, and the app is going to pass this restart game, and here we're going to have const restart game. And what could that possibly do, this restart game? How can we restart a game? Well, let me show you. It's fairly simple. We can just set our game options to null. And that will trigger the whole chain of events because we have here if no game options, which is the initial value that we don't have any game options selected by the user, we're gonna show the settings. And once the user selects something, they start the game, they click on set game options, it's been set, game options are set, it checks again, shows the board, passes to the board, we're going to the board is taking the game options and using the get images are fetched. If images length is bigger, then we start the use game logic and then the rest is history. Whew. All right, what are we missing? We're not missing anything, but I think our style is missing. So let me check. My board, there's actually a div here, like this, and boom, boom, class name, you know it, styles.board. Yeah, there we go. Let's refresh it and check it. So let's go for animals and add 12 of them, 12 of cards. Let's go with medium. Start. Boom. A cat, a snail, snail, snail. There we go. Cannot click on them again. Cat, cat. Very good. Something, something. No, this. See, cannot click on it while it's not flipped. What are those, monkeys? No, it's another thing. I don't know the name of it in English. And a cow. And now, awesome. Finish game. Click on finish game. And there you go. You can start the game again. Awesome. So if you want to expand this thing, you could add maybe the score here, or maybe give some other advanced features where you could kind of challenge the user even more. And you know where to add them. You can always extend the settings thing here. You have the settings component where you can do that. So it's all kind of like, as I said, there is already a chain of event happening and you can just plug into that, extend it, and keep on extending your app. And that concludes this API challenge where we build the memory game app using Pexels API. Hope it was fun for you, that you learned a ton. As always, leave a comment below. Tell me what you liked, what you didn't like. Maybe something that you want to see improved next time. I hope that my software didn't do too much trouble for this recording, though I see that it kind of like gave up on me midterm. Happy holidays if you're still holidaying or if it's after. Wishing you a good day, good evening or night, wherever you are. Stay safe. Click like and subscribe if you liked it, and see you next one. Bye.